Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we're going to talk about a topic that many think is a Sufi topic, or many would assume that this topic is just a topic of a side of Islam and is not the core of Islam, when in reality, it is actually the core of Islam. When we talk about mindfulness in dhikr, and what I mean by mindfulness, I don't mean it the Buddhist way or the Zen way, but I'm actually talking about the metaphorical meaning of what it means to be mindful, what it means to recognize the words, what it means to bring about a focus. And that's what dhikr is actually all about. It's all about bringing in the focus. And dhikr is not only in repeating certain words, it's actually more than that. In where there's the visual dhikr, you're taking a moment to recognize the magnificence of the Lord Almighty. You're also taking in a moment to repeat the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So think of it as when you become Muslim, you first start with recognizing Islam, but then what puts you within the realm of Islam is really Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. It's actually starting with dhikr. It starts with dhikr and it continues to become and transform that dhikr into a behavioral dhikr, in where there's the financial dhikr, which is with zakah, which is with sadaqah, and behavioral dhikr with salah, and of course the social dhikr, when you're actually extending that dhikr to salat al-rahim, to reaching out to the friends, reaching out to your family, reaching out to your parents. All those different areas are actually the social dhikr. And then when we're looking at that type of dhikr, it's in order to bring about a change in our focus from looking at the center of activity to actually looking beyond it, and to produce a clear visual definition of what you're actually doing. Which is why when we talk about Sharia, the word Sharia, yes, it means path, but it actually is speaking to us about what it means to apply the dhikr, the different norms, the different forms, the different types of dhikr that actually go back to all the times of the early prophets. When we speak about mindfulness and focus and why dhikr comes in, it actually starts with putting in that orbit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then takes us into recognizing the purpose of our life, that it's not to live a life in where we're just taking a moment and just enjoying our life, but it's actually living for a purpose. And which is why, in order to bring about that purpose, the actual matter in life is that you relate your purpose to the main reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you. You relate your behavior to the purpose. And that's why that in itself changes our relationship with the world around us, whether we're talking about the past, or whether we're talking about the future, or whether we're talking about ourselves or the people around us. So instead of seeing pain, it actually takes us to looking at Allah Almighty as a Shafi, instead of looking at our own body and senses and recognizing our weakness, to looking beyond and recognizing that the Lord Almighty is the one that controls all the different things that surround us, from focusing on seeing the different things within our nature or the nature around us, to actually seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power in the nature that we see around us, or even in the world, and even in our life. In order to gain that dhikr, a repetition is always part of dhikr, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always emphasizes that الذاكرين الله كثيرا والذاكرات, those that remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala many, many, many times. In other words, frequently. And why is it important? We're going to talk about that later on. So what does dhikr actually do? It detaches you from focusing and from having that focus in your weakness to focusing on the power of Allah Almighty, from focusing on your past to focusing on hope in the future, from focusing on yourself to focusing on Allah Almighty. The change in how it brings in that focus must actually be accompanied with dhikr. And why does Islam actually bring that? And when we speak about why does Islam bring that? Well, that's in order for us to focus on the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us for before even our own existence. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala order us to do and help us in order to recognize that mindfulness in the dhikr? In other words, how do we actually revive our Islam every single day? Repetition is important. Repetition in dhikr throughout the day, whether during the morning, before night, or even in the behavioral dhikr, in order for you not to contradict your oral behavior from the action and from the behaviors that you do with your extremities. You don't contradict yourself, but you actually live the word that you are actually saying. You recognize it, not just a word of a slogan or a motto, but it's actually to become a word where you apply it in heart, on your tongue, in your eyes, in your ears, and even in what steps you take in life. So that's why what includes in dhikr is when you actually abstain from negative external and internal forces. When we speak about external and internal negative forces, external can be the peers, can be the different things in life, the social media, all these different things that act as the currency that might actually shift your focus without you recognizing. On the inside, they definitely have an implication where you can feel a certain change within yourself in order to support or in order to let others just see you. Based on that, you actually take a moment to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually the center of all your dhikr as a mu'min. What is the point of focus? Number one, attention, bringing attention in seeing the magnificence of the Lord Almighty within your creation, within every single piece of thing within your creation, and of course, every single corner within the nature that you see around you, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in order to shift our focus, tells us, and inside of you, there is a sign of the magnificence of the Lord Almighty, in order for you to recognize that just when you think that you fail to do 1, 2, 3, you recognize that the Lord Almighty is the one that owns and that controls the energy, the power, and everything around you and even within you. And in order to see that, the dhikr, the visual dhikr, comes in where you recognize وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ لِيَجْزِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسَاءُوا بِمَا عَمِلُوا وَيَجْزِيَ الَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا بِالْحُسْنَى. Everything is actually under the control of the Lord Almighty. And that is in order for us to recognize the pattern in where you see beyond just different pieces of that pattern to see the force that controls the pattern. That is Allah Almighty. And that is in order to put us on the track in where we should be recognizing the most important thing in dhikr, and that is the purpose in life. That at the end of the day, the Lord Almighty had created life, death, and the patterns that surround you in every single corner, in order to recognize that even when things go wrong around you, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that controls everything, and is the one, therefore, the one to focus on, because al-akhirah, judgment day, is really what matters. The different failures that you might come across, the different things that might happen to you, it's taken you from seeing yourself, the force of time, force of energy, as to focusing on seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the true energy, as the true power behind all the powers to change. How do we actually come to that point? How do we feel it? Repetition of dhikr. The repetition of dhikr is in order to enhance your ability to focus on Allah Almighty, in where it brings in a clear and a sharp focus in where you would recognize it. And that's why salah as one very, in fact, the main center of dhikr, in order to recognize the Lord Almighty in Surah Al-Fatiha, in Allahu Akbar, in every single word that you actually do in salah is actually a form of dhikr. And that is the way where you would connect yourself with the words of Allah Almighty, the words that He had sent with Jibreel through the Quranic recitation. And of course, it affects you later on to recognizing not only a salah in where there is the prostration, the ruku' and the sujood, but you go beyond and you actually make your salah the light that you see the world through, and it later affects your heart and then vibrates from a word of tongue to a word that affects your heart, and then later vibrates into your behavior and affects every single relationship with the rest of your body. It becomes a word to vibrate from the tongue to a word that affects the behavior, which is why in Shahada, in Islam, in Arkan al-Islam, in the pillars of Islam, it actually starts with the Shahadatan first, and then it talks about Salah, and then Zakah, and then Siyam. It takes us into that order. But first, it actually needs to recognize that visual dhikr part of it, and then in order for it to transform into a continued dhikr of salah, and then in order to affect the different types of the behaviors that surround us, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. The true believers are the ones when the when the name of the Lord Almighty is mentioned, their hearts would tremble. And then when the words of the Lord Almighty and His verses are recited on them, it would increase them in faith, and they would depend on the Lord Almighty. Why depend on the Lord Almighty? Because they come to then a recognition that the Lord Almighty is the force, is the power behind everything. So they recognize through dhikr that it's not their power, their force to change everything, but they depend on Allah Almighty. But in order to get to that point, what do? يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ. They perform the prayer and take a moment to actually do a very important relationship where وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. Even though it would actually make sense to take in the money and keep the money and save the money, but a believer looks through the lens of La ilaha illallah and understands that to give from what they were actually working on maintaining, which is wealth, they would give it because they know that Allah Almighty is the one that is a razaq. So they would have to give in order to sense what it means to live the satisfaction, what it means to live the real meaning of a razaq. Razaq is the word, is the name that you want to sense with that. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ حَقًّا. Those are the real believers. They would have the different elevations and the different levels of near their Lord Almighty, and they would have the forgiveness. وَرِزْقٌ كَرِيمٌ. That rizq is really related to the rizq right there, in where you're giving to recognize the name of Allah Almighty. The things that affect your ability to do repetition are many things. You might say, I tried, but I couldn't. And that's why, in order to be able to do the dhikr, there are so many things that you have to eliminate from your life. To eliminate actually means to find more time in order to be able to do the dhikr. Speaking about other sins is one thing you need to eliminate. speaking about your pain. Instead of speaking about your pain, remember, إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله. I only complain my pains to the Lord Almighty. And that's what that's what the Prophet actually said when he was asked about his situation. And speaking about others' privacies are things you also want to eliminate, because that moment that you're just taking in that pride to speak about others' matters, it just makes you become more arrogant, where you would only recognize other people's sins and not recognize your own. Speaking about dunya in general takes away your ability to focus on Allah Almighty. Speaking about your dunya takes away your ability and your focus from focusing on akhirah. Little by little, it starts taking away your deen. And then many will complain, I don't feel khushu' in salah. I don't feel khushu' in sitting here and there. I don't feel it. I would say, eliminate. That's why even الشافعي, he said, I شكوت إلى وكيع سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وأخبرني بأن العلم نور ونور الله لا يهدى لعاصي. He said, I complained to Waki', his sheikh, and he guided me to leave sin. And he told me that ilm, seeking knowledge, or seeking closeness to the Lord Almighty cannot be attained when a person is busy and focused on sin. Sin is going to be connected to either speaking about your pains, or speaking about your other privacies, or speaking about dunya, or speaking about different matters that are just plain dunya. Nurullahi la yuhda li'asi. The light of the Lord Almighty will not be granted for a person that's focusing on sin. The Prophet ﷺ actually said, in order to teach us, how do we actually get that? And he said, there are three things that Allah Almighty hates. Qeel and qal. She said, and they said, and he said, and all the derivatives of said. Because at the end, you'll find yourself just quoting X and Y and Z and getting lost within that area. And إضاعة المال, wasting and wandering money, and just working on trying to find the best deals, shopping, trying to find the issue of money, and then without you realizing, you have just wasted your life trying to contain the dunya and not the akhirah. وكثرة السؤال, and asking too many questions. Because the second you ask too many questions, you actually lose your focus of attention. Shifting focus not only is on the outside and your behavior, but even from negative feelings on the inside into bringing in a positive focus. So from feeling guilty to actually focusing on forgiveness, from feeling the pain to seeking healing. And that's why when we actually make the dua, Allahumma Rabban Nas, أذهب البأس واشفي أنت الشافي لا شفاء إلا شفاءك. What is the dua when one is feeling pain? Allahumma Rabban Nas, oh Lord, you are the Lord of the people. أذهب البأس, take away the pain. Washfi, and bring about cure. You are the one that brings cure, for there is no cure but the cure that you bring. What did it do? It took away your focus from looking into pain, from feeling the pain, to feeling and the hope in Allah Almighty to revenge, to compensate, and to heal, in order to make the change from feeling the failure and weakness to focusing on Allah's power to change all the weakness. And which is why it's important to remember those different du'as. Like Hisn al-Muslim has all those different du'as to help you memorize and to help you learn how to refocus, how to shift your focus from one side to focusing on Allah Almighty, from looking within yourself to looking outside and seeking the power of Allah Almighty. Focusing on Allah Almighty's power rather than your weakness is basically focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring about the healing, to bring about the healing, and rather than focusing on the illness. And of course, the practice itself takes time. It doesn't happen within a day. It doesn't happen within 1 minute. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't seek medical attention. Absolutely not. But it's in order to help you to heal. You recognize that even the ilm, the medical studies, they are just going to be part of what is going to help us, but the true healing is actually from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How does Islam shift the focus? Islam shifts the focus by first starting when you recognize that Allah Almighty is the orbit, is the center of changing everything within your life, where you recognize that the Lord Almighty is your creator. You recognize Allah Almighty's power through his names and attributes. And why did the Prophet ﷺ actually say, whoever, for the Lord Almighty has 99 names and attributes, whoever man ahsaha dakhala al-jannah, whoever repeats them and memorize them, they would enter Jannah. But is it just a word to just repeat and say? No, it's actually a word where once you repeat them, once you read them, once you understand them, then you recognize them within the creation, within the world around you. And then you focus from focusing on poverty to focusing that the Lord Almighty is a Razaq, from focusing on failure to the Lord Almighty being in Nasr, the one to give victory, from focusing on illness to focusing that the Lord Almighty is the one to bring healing and cure, and from focusing on your own weakness. And which is why suicide is actually haram, because that person actually forgot or disregarded, or a moment of not recognizing that the Lord Almighty is actually the one. When you lose hope in everyone, you have your hope in Allah Almighty. So from focusing on your weakness to focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Al-Aziz, Al-Jabbar, the most efficient and the one that is most almighty. So what do you turn to in worship and understanding your life and purpose? You turn to the Lord Almighty, which is why with this practice, it actually makes you grow stronger in your Islam. It shifts the focus from materialism to spirit, and of course, the spirit of getting the different views within Al-Quran and the Sunnah, and where it shifts your focus from focusing on dunya to focusing on akhirah. In practice, puts you in salah, from focusing on your body to focusing on your spirituality, where you're taking out and eliminating different things that your body enjoys and endures, to actually taking you into practice and focusing through siyam and fasting in order to help you remember that it's not your body that is the main focus, but it's actually your spirituality, from focusing on intimacy to focusing on halal relations in all forms, from focusing on work and money to focusing on halal income and spending, and from focusing on appearance to reducing that focus by lowering the gaze, hijab, reducing spending on dunya from wants to needs, and trying to remember that in order to help you gain all that, إن الله لا ينظر إلى صوركم وأموالكم وإنما ينظر إلى قلوبكم وأعمالكم. The Lord Almighty does not look at your images and your wealth and how much you're making, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually looks at your hearts and your actions. And that's what matters. When we talk about heart, it is actually equivalent for آمنوا أعمالكم آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات, which is why you would see that repetition in the Quran. It shifts the focus from natural negative feelings to positive spiritual feelings. I want you to recognize that word. Islam goes farther than practical forms of practice into speaking about even the inner motives. So it's not enough to say, well, I'm not doing such and such, but it actually goes farther and tells you, no, even envy, even jealousy, even anger, you need to work on that in order to get elevated in the way you see the world, you see yourself, and you see those around you. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said, a Muslim is a brethren to his Muslim. They do not betray them and do not basically say lies about them and do not condescend them. All the Muslim to another Muslim is sacred in a relationship where their own reputation, their own chastity, their own wealth and property, and their own life is all sacred. And therefore, every Muslim has the responsibility to protect that for another, to protect all that for other Muslims. Now, sorry about that. Now, in order to let that be our behavior, abstaining from negative external and internal influences. It is extremely important to gain that from looking from the negative behavior to a positive behavior. That's what dhikr does. Dhikr changes from a natural reaction to a spiritual action, from human and animal reaction to divine mannerism. That's why when you look at what it means to do dhikr, we have to recognize those parts within the dhikr. It teaches us how to recognize to a new action of principle, in where the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the believers that a believer does not engage in cursing and does not engage in using any type of a language where it contains profanity, and does not use any type of language that is actually illicit. Why? Because a believer goes beyond this type of a negative behavior to a positive behavior. From a natural reaction, it goes into a spiritual action. Remember that all the time, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says a good deed is not equal to a bad deed. In other words, a good behavior is not the same as a negative behavior. And push and do and put forward a positive behavior, and then you will see the power of that, bringing in what used to be an animosity between you and them, that person becomes as if they were close, dear friends. And which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ said about him that he loves beauty and he loves to see the impact and the beauty of the blessings that he had given him. And he hates and detests al-bu'sa wa-taba'us. What is al-bu'sa wa-taba'us? Al-bu's is basically a person that's constantly complaining about things, that's constantly just looking at the world with a negative perspective. But that's why for a mu'min, they would shift their focus not only in a behavior, but it actually starts within. It starts from our heart. How does Islam help in attaining that piece of it? Know that your weakness does not control the world or your life. And know that time is in the hands of Allah Almighty. Even when things go wrong, don't look at the past. You will clash. And if you are driving and you're looking at the rear mirror, look ahead and look for Allah Almighty to give you the power to change. Know that justice is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sharia, and know that justice is in Allah's decree, and know that there's akhirah, and this life is a bridge to it. So don't lose hope when you feel that you have been oppressed and you couldn't get to justice or get to getting your rights back. Know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to compensate you. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, ما يصيب المسلم من نصب ولا وصب ولا هم ولا حزن ولا أذى ولا غم حتى الشوكة يشاكها إلا كفر الله بها من خطاياه. The Prophet ﷺ said that no fatigue, no disease, no sorrow, no sadness, nor hurt, nor distress befalls a Muslim, even if it were the prick he receives from a thorn, but that Allah Almighty expiates some of his sins for that. The implications of dhikr, they actually build inner power to connecting Allah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It builds a behavior of humility, self-control, endurance, chastity, and even the courage, because you will become confident in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even when your own strengths fail you. It builds a spiritual connection of tazkiyah with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember, on the top of those dhikr, Allahu Akbar. Say it and repeat it, and many, many, many times as you can. Repeat Alhamdulillah, to recognize the bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, rather than only focusing on pains. Recognizing La ilaha illallah, to gain the confidence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate and is the soul of all power to change everything. How do I actually do that and bring about an understanding? Quran recitation and understanding the meanings of the words is actually important and is the best of the dhikr. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Quran was made easy to listen, to hear, to repeat, to understand. فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Is there anyone going to take the chance and the time and the investment to comprehend in the words of the Lord Almighty? And finally, dua is on the top of those dhikr as well, because with dua, you're taking a moment to speak it. As human beings, we want to ventilate, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you ventilate to him only and not to people. Because the second you ventilate to people, people will abuse your needs. People will abuse and take advantage of your weaknesses at that moment. So with dua, you're recognizing that the Lord Almighty is the soul and is the ultimate power to bring about the change. So let your complaint, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. Let that dua be the word you give as a conversation between you and the Lord Almighty. Joining in tafsir and halaqas to learn Islam is actually supposed to help you find the meanings of those dua. So it won't be just a word that is repeated, but it becomes the dhikr, in where one, you repeat, you understand, to let it vibrate in your words and in your behavior, to let it be a word that vibrates from tongue, to vibrating in your heart, to vibrating in your action. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone, for listening. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.